double the line up and actually do some lettering rather than some of the other colors are. Have this red, absolutely beautiful to write with in a filamented tip. The tip is massive. Hi, I'm Paul Antonio, and welcome to the Calligraphy Masters channel. A little backstory about this madness that we're going to jump into right now. Milen came to stay with me and decided to dig through my drawers of brushes and said, "Can you do something on brush pens?" And I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Well, what about this and this?" And I said, "That's not possible. There just isn't time to do that." So he asked me to do an overview of some of the brush pens which Kuretake carries. Now, I have an absolute mountain of Kuretake tools and materials. I love the brand. And I don't just love the brand because of the variety of tools and materials they carry. I'm very passionate about Kuretake because their products are made with such care and they are such high quality products that they will last a long time. So, from a quality point of view, they are really worth every cent you spend on them. So in this video, I'm going to sort of cover not all of the brush pens that they have, because of course that would not be possible. Apart from which, quite a lot of the brush pens they have are not available outside of Japan. I'm only really going to cover the ones that we can get in the West. So in order to start sort of understanding what these tools are, it's important to get a sense of the differences between these types of brush pens. I break down the brush pens in a slightly different way to the way other people break them down. So I tend to refer to what other people call as felt tip brush pens as spongy tipped brush pens, because invariably they're not made of felt. My description, spongy tip, is because of how the tip absorbs and allows ink or a fluid medium to flow through it. I then have, within that category, tip size. So it could be large, medium, small, or very small. It could be hard, medium, or flexible, or it could be highly flexible. So there is a really, really flexible tip that I'll show you that's a little bit tricky to write with. And so those are the spongy tipped brush pen. The next category of brush pens I refer to as filamented brush pens. Now, these are brush pens that look like real hair brushes that we use for like watercolor painting and gouache painting. I don't like to call them bristles because when I think of a bristled brush, I think of something like, a hog hair brush, a really stiff brush, rather than something like a Kolinsky sable brush. I refer to the synthetic version of these tools as filamented because they are man-made filaments. And if I say a real brush, I actually mean, that it is fur or, squirrel hair or Kolinsky sable or something like that. So this is how I make my distinctions when I'm teaching about brush pens, and I find that my students have had a little bit more success with these distinctions because it's easier to tell them exactly what you're talking about. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to start with the more frequently accessible brush pens that we have from Kuretake internationally, particularly in the West. And then I'll move on to some other categories of brush pens that Kuretake make, which are accessible, but they may not be accessible everywhere. I had a quick look on Amazon to make sure that people could order them. People like Jet Pens and Cult Pens, Scribblers, Don Neal, Paper Ink Art, Zipley, all of these people tend to carry lots of Kuretake products. And so you will be able to get them from someone if you cannot find them from your local supplier. And so with these brush pens, let's start with the ones which are most accessible. I'm using one of the free grids from the PA Scribe Copperplate Script Grids handout, which has both a vertical line and a 55, and obviously, horizontal lines for your baseline and your X height. So the brush pens I'm going to start off with are the ones that most people tend to access. This is a Brushables brush pen, and these normally come in two colors. One color is darker than the other, but they complement each other. Glasses for this. And so these are the spongy tipped brush pens. Press, release, press. I do a thin line, medium line, and I change my position for a heavy line. The darker ones, you can go back in and add a little bit of darkness to the base of the letter. Of course, you can write with these, you can press, release, press and release and press, and curve. So you can do lots of different kinds of letter forms. We can do a copper plate letter. We can do a modern calligraphy letter, and we can do other kinds of things. We can do a sort of Roman, brush Roman. You could double the line up and actually do some lettering rather than combination of lettering and calligraphy. So the next type of tool that I use that you will find with this kind of brushable, and I'll show you this one just because it's such a lovely color, and that's the darker color there. Kuretake also makes something called a scroll and brush pen, and in the scroll and brush pen we have two sides to this. We have a 3.5 marker, which is a scroll tip, and just a little bit of information on this, and actually use it this way, or you can use it the other way. Just remember they are not the same. So here the heavier line is on the right and the heavier line is on the left. So on the scroll and brush, you have this marker tip and you have brush tip. This brush tip is the same as the brush tips that we've just seen above for the brushables. So notice I'm changing the position of my hand to get different movements. Of course, I'm not using my fingers because these letters are large, so I really am using arm movement. The next type of brush pen from Kuretake that you might have access to is the clean color real brush. So the clean color real brush is a filamented brush pen. If we zoom in, you can see that if I press this, you can see that there are bristles, or as I call them, filaments. These are man-made, and this allows us to do this kind of brush writing. Now, of course, I use these in a very different way when I'm writing copper plate. Sorry about that. As I don't use them on their side, twizzling that to get it back. I would not use the brush like this for writing copper plate. I would use it in a slightly different way, which allows me to mimic it more accurately. But those are the two main types of brush pens from Kuretake you will probably have access to where you are. Now, there are two other types that I've seen around which are reasonably accessible, and they are the art and graphic twin brush pens. Now, one is a spongy tip, this one, the original one, and one is a filamented tip. So it says R, B, and F, means real brush and fine. If we look at the back side of both of these, we'll see that they have the same sort of bullet. They will give us so they're the same size. That's clear for this one. Now, the R, B, and F tip cap slots in, which is great. This is like the real brush tip. Where is it? Up here. Except it is much bigger than the real brush tip. So obviously the kinds of shapes that you can get with this are bigger